I'm Shane Hawk. I'll be moderating today. So we have our lovely panelists here. Can we start off with like mini introductions and then maybe discussing really briefly your most recently published works? We'll start with Alex and
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Alex Brown. My YA horror comedy debut published last year. And this year I have a YA horror. Oh my gosh. Damn, it's been a while since I've done this. Damned If You Do. And it's like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Buffy was a queer Filipino American stage manager. And Giles was a guidance counselor who was also a demon. So it's a fun time. And this year I have a YA horror anthology called The House Where Death Lives coming out that is stories inside a haunted house. And a slasher, YA slasher called Rest in Peaches that'll be out in October.
I'm Sumiko Saulson. I hope I said the darker side of speculative. Maybe I did everything. So my name is Sumiko Saulson. I am the Bram Stoker nominated author of The Rat King. The latest singles that I have out are Melancholia, a book of dark poetry, so that's poetry. Somalia, the Metamorphoses of Frontier, which is the second novel in the series. It starts with happiness and other diseases, about a young man who is bipolar, who is seeing strange things that have to be real, happening. And they involve, Greco-Roman gods who are petty and cruel. And I also have a comic, graphic novel out, and that is called Ghost Cat is Best Cat, Dream Monster, and other.
I'm Maggie Tokuda-Hall. I imagine I was invited to this panel because I wrote a graphic novel called Squad, which is about a group of teenage girls who turn into werewolves at the full moon, find the worst boy they can at a party and eat him. And I just tried it in sequel, so that's nice. I am also here today because my young adult duology, Siren Song and the Spy, was nominated in the young adult category, which I'm very grateful for. And if you were looking for my most recent work, I have a book called The Worst Ronin that is a samurai buddy comedy with like hearts and demons and revenge and stuff.
once again, I'm Shane Hawk. I'm enrolled in the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma, although I was born and raised in North County, San Diego, where I'm from today. Most people know me as the co-editor of Never Whistle at Night, which is on my shirt. It's also here. I think it's nominated today. And proud to say that the second one is in the works. And next month, like 2 weeks from now, I'm flying to Washington for a residency to make a indigenous horror stage play with my friend Andre L. Rogers. And that's going to be premiering in October up in Washington, Olympia, in Bellingham, 2 different dates. And then I'll be touring the West Coast, I think, next October. Plus I teach high school history.
I forgot to mention that they, them are my pronouns.
Okay, just a warm up. So I think we'll do the same rotation, so starting with Alex and down this way. Warm up question. So what is your favorite comfort horror movie? So we're all horror fiction writers. How about a horror movie? Something that maybe you return for nostalgia, or something that's comforting in that weird horror way.
Yeah. So I have a few. The Babadook, definitely. Yes. One queer icon, but 2 just very good portrayal of grief and how it affects a family. Also Scream, just because Scream. And this BBC thing from like the 90s called Ghost Watch. that actually people tuned in late to and they thought it was real. It is such a good time. Please check out Ghost Watch. Highly recommend.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really basic 90s to early aughts goth person list, but The Craft, The Crow, and Bram Stoker's Dracula, you know, we all know it's trash. And I feel like since I did know Anne Rice, I feel especially bad for really like Queen of the Town because she hated that movie. But I loved it, and I also love the movie series that they have, by the way. So yeah, those things. Yeah.
My absolute favorite rewatch movie that I've invented a drinking game to go along with. So if you're in the market for one, I will share the rules with you because they've been honed over many years of playing it on my birthday. For Deep Blue Sea, which is a terrible movie that I love deeply. So that one, Jennifer's Body is probably the movie that's had the greatest impact on my own work and the one that I have the most fun rewatching with groups of people other than Deep Blue Sea. And then despite its horrible, complicated depictions of certain things, Silence of the Lambs is one of those movies that I just put on while I'm doing chores and things like that, because I find it comforting, which I know doesn't speak well of my character.
Let's see, a comfort movie for me, I'd probably say Hereditary. You know,
What's your comfort movie?
Head falls off, you roll the way. The ants, you know, I'm okay with ants. My wife hates ants, so she won't rewatch it. That on fire, that's all comfort.
Oh my god.
No, but for I would say The Thing. I could just, you know, when I'm doing chores or washing dishes, going to sleep to it, and watching that every year, times, whatever. Yeah, I would say that. So let's see. How about what was the first story or experience that made you realize the power of horror as a genre? How did it influence your approach to writing? Start this.
This is sort of embarrassing. This is not a highbrow answer, but when I was a kid, I would basically only read Calvin and Hobbes comics or R.L. Stein books. Like those were the two options, and that was it. And any other book was like just not interesting to me. And when I got old enough to kind of graduate from Goosebumps to Fear Street and then to the Christopher Pike books and Lois Duncan books, it felt very worldly. But I have since gone back and revisited Lois Duncan because I do genuinely think she's like a master of the genre for young adult horror specifically. And they pulled up incredibly well in the editions that haven't been retrofitted to seem more modern. They tried to re-edition a bunch of her books, I think in like the 2000s, in ways that truly do not function with the plot. So they'll be like, yeah, they have a streaming platform, but it's clearly meant to be a radio show. Like things like just don't make sense. But the actual stories are still like incredibly impactful and like stirring emotionally, and the characters are very real. And so I think like I was always kind of a spooky kid, but I liked it best where it kind of brushed against camp and humor was where I really lived.
I think that when I was a kid, my parents left a copy of Peter Straub's Ghost Story. I actually started to read. I was like, I'm in 5th grade, and yeah, yeah, I was in the panic reader. But you know, when I was in 7th grade, I actually picked up the Talisman, which had Stephen King and Peter Straub, and then ended up being a big Stephen King fan, as one does. So I would say that was very formative. But then I also think that I started figuring out the things that were not actually called horror or terrifying, because I started reading Dune when I was in 7th grade. When I got to Dune Messiah, I was terrified of the nightmares. And when I was in my mid-20s, I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. That is also really very, very scary.
Going back to Scream, I was scared of horror for a long time, because my mom rented Scream and was watching it when she thought my brother and I were asleep, and I was like, I don't know, like 10. And I come down the stairs and I see the part where like Matthew Lillard's character, like the TV just slams on like his head. And I was traumatized as a child, and I was like, I can't do this. And whenever we go to Blockbuster, I would just like run down the horror aisle, but like a horse with blinders on. I'd be like, no. I know, but there was something always so intriguing about it, right? Like I didn't have to run down the horror aisle, but I was still like, what if I did it? And I think, you know, that kind of thing also feeds into like when kids do like Bloody Mary and stuff like that. Like, I think I was on a panel one time where someone said like the like scariest like group of people are like preteen girls, because that's when we're like trying to do all these rituals and like summoning spirits and like doing all this stuff, you know. So yeah, I think even though I was scared of it and avoided it for a while, I was always drawn to it, and I was fortunate enough to have a friend who loved horror and finds people's like gateway horror. So she slowly got me into the genre. Her name is Rebecca Mahoney. She also writes young adult books. Check her out. She's great.
I think they told me to weigh in on some of them. So
You should weigh in on all of them.
okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I would say my first, like you guys were all mentioning childhood. I'm thinking like maybe more adult experience. So like when I read Stephen Graham Jones's Mongrels, that book showed me what you could do with horror as a genre. It's kind of recreated, reinvented werewolf lore on a fundamental level. It brought together like the crux of it was really family structure, struggle within family dynamics, but it was all encased in a werewolf story, which before that, I had that kind of one-dimensional idea of horror, like just bloody guts, heads getting knocked off on posts. Things like that. Yeah. And so I guess that would be one reading experience that kind of made me shift my thinking and influenced my writing. Where a lot of my stories, I haven't written a novel yet. I'm working on my debut right now. But I would say most of my stories, there's always an element of strong familial connections, whether it's blood or kinship. So yeah, thanks to you for that.
You can answer the other questions?
Huh?
You can answer the other questions?
Sure. So yeah, next one, let's move into that one. So horror often reflects societal fears and anxieties, right? How do contemporary issues influence your work? And how do you incorporate them into your storytelling without being too ham-fisted? We'll start with Sumiko.
Yeah, it's almost like you knew that when I first started writing about him, I was really ham-fisted. So, so I have always incorporated modern issues into my writing. It's important to me as an African American and as a queer person. But when I first started doing it, it was very preachy, honestly. And I had to really learn not to do it. And for me, I had to learn how to do it by reading out of horror genre books, like really a lot of Toni Morrison, because she does it really well. When she talked about contemporary issues, she would talk about them from the point of a human being that was going through stuff. So, you really have to ground it in well-developed characters and character building so that people are relating to that particular character, and so that they understand what the character is going through, so that they need a particular lens. And when you go outside and you're just talking about what's going on in the world, you have to be careful to not make this just become like an info dump. You know what I'm saying? So and that can be a little bit complicated. Yeah. And it helps to have good editors too, because I remember I made a mention of, I think, Breonna Taylor in one of the stories I was writing, or it might have been actually another name. And my editor's like, everyone who reads this is not going to know who you're talking about, and it's not going to age well unless you're very specifically letting the audience know what you're saying and in the context. So yeah.
Gosh, yeah, I mean, Squad, which is my only book that's like truly straight horror, is about rape culture. Like that's, and I always joke that it's like my memoir, but with werewolves. Like it takes place where I went to high school. The girl who stars in it looks like mysteriously like me. And like you're like, how do you keep it from being campus? It was like, I don't know that I did. It's like it's pretty like on the nose in some ways, and I use some names in it that are like obvious fuck yous to particular people in the world. And one of the like the first boy they kill that Becca sees them all kill is named Bart O'Kavanaugh, which you might remember. That's been used in his memoir that was clearly not the actual justice, and I think we can agree that we beat him on that. I did try to always, like, the point of that book isn't to tell kids that rape culture is wrong. Like, they know, they're aware, they're human beings with like a basic semblance of understanding, even the ones who are participating in it and perpetuating it. It was really, I wrote it as a means to look at kids and tell them like, it's okay to be fucking mad. That's it. There's a place where you get to imagine this horrible thing and being a terrible person, and that's fine. Because the thing that is happening is so unfair and so horrific that you should at least have one place where you can safely indulge in this like really gory revenge fantasy, because you will have the rest of your life to try to answer the question of like, well, how do we fix it? And how do we make sure that it's better? And I think that putting that on kids is totally unfair when we haven't even addressed the veracity of their feelings yet. And so for me, like the ham-fistedness, like in some ways it's like super on the nose because I'm looking right at them and being like, yeah, you're Supreme Court justice, isn't that fucked up? But I'm hoping that it'll be tempered by the fact that the girls who are in it are not there as role models, and they should be. I hope that readers are aware of that because they're murderers. But that they will sense some sort of like catharsis and justice just in acknowledging that their anger is real and deserves to be acknowledged at all, which is kind of doesn't happen for most people who suffer from rape culture. We know that there's real punishment, and that we can't trust law enforcement to give us any kind of justice for this, and that this is happening to a huge proportion of our population, no matter what gender you are. And like it just anyway, so I'm hoping, I don't know, I feel like horror and comedy hold hands in a lot of ways, and one of the ways that they hold hands is that they can kind of take your guard down with humor and then slap you in the face with horror. And I feel like that's one of the ways that you can keep from being too like obvious in the way that you're talking about
it. Speaking of horror comedy, so my answer is very similar to Maggie. And if you haven't read Squad yet, please do, because it's so good. I'm excited to see. Thank you. I'm not trying to get it early, but maybe. So my debut, like I said, is a queer, like Filipino American, is also a stage manager. She realizes during Tech Week that she accidentally sold her soul to a demon a few years back. And now the demon is in town to collect on the bargain. But the thing is, she sold her soul to a demon because she has an abusive father, and he was in the middle of trying to kill her. And kind of in a moment of just like pure fear and an instinct on needing to survive, she sort of like, the demon sort of heard her pain and came and helped her. And there is, parts of the book that address that like no one else really was kind of there to help her. Like her mom is also being abused, but she is a Filipino immigrant, and like there's a lot of different things kind of happening there, and that relationship is very strained. And Cordy, my main character, kind of points out like the only one who ever helped her like was a demon, like no adults, like nobody in her life, like just this random demon. So yeah, I think, for me, the way that I think horror is great because you can take these terrible things that we experience and that exist in the world and the things that we do to each other, and you can hide them behind a supernatural thing, right? So like while child abuse is present, we kind of couch that in my book behind like demons and like the demonic, and you can give the characters something to kind of fight back against that they might not feel like they can, you know, as a teen reading the book, or as a kid who might be experiencing something traumatic. So yeah, I think for me, the way that I do it is definitely blending horror and comedy. My main character shares my coping mechanism of just making jokes out of things so that you can kind of keep going like with your day. And I think, you know, a big point of what I wanted to write in the book is that like these terrible things are happening and we might have to make some hard choices in order to get through them or survive them. But at the end of the day, a big part of my my main character's journey is accepting that like she deserves to be loved regardless. And I think that that's, you know, a message that I hope the teens who read my book, who might be going through hard times kind of understand, that things might be rough, but there are still people out there who will care for them and help them. They might just be a demon.
I mean, as for me, I'm always putting contemporary issues into my fiction, because I see horror as a really good vehicle to address the things that we're dealing with in real life. I don't know, and it's hard to be, you know, not too ham-fisted. I think in my debut collection, I was a mix between being too vague and then too on the nose. So I'm still trying to find that balance, because I'm kind of an outspoken person. I like to, like you said, say fuck you to certain people.
Specifically.
And then sometimes like a quiet, and then, you know, sometimes it's like a quiet, like, right? Or whisper. But, for example, a story that I wrote I was invited to an anthology called Morbidologies. And the story I wrote was centered on the Supreme Court case that was looking at the ICWA. Again, if you guys don't know what that is, that's the Indian Child Welfare Act. So all the way throughout US history, all the way up to 1978, Indigenous children could just be plucked out of their families and given, you know, to predominantly white families. And they were mostly used for like forced farm labor or whatever else they wanted on the land. And so this has been an issue, so that act basically protected children from that happening. And so that was reviewed last year. And so it was, all of us natives were like really on the edge of our seats, like, is this going to be overturned? You know, like Roe v. Wade in June 2022. You know, is it going to happen to us? You know, is this going to be overturned? But luckily it didn't. But the whole story is like a post-apocalypse dystopian like look back at it being overturned. And these people that were stripped away and put in the foster care system and trying to reconnect with their tribes and trying to deal with all that. Yeah, I don't think it was too ham-fisted, but it was definitely in there. The whole through line was ICWA and forced farm labor and repercussions if that did get overturned again, and this far future of it happening to everyone.
I feel like in general lately I've been less and less impressed with subtlety, which sounds like it's like a stupid thing to say out loud, but I mean it's like we live in like incredibly unsubtle times, and there are like we're watching like a pretty intense movement toward fascism in our own country that's like rapidly approaching. And so it doesn't feel like a moment we're necessarily worrying about whether our horror is ham-fisted enough or like it's like subtle enough is like the real question for me in some ways, like not as an insult to the question. I just mean like in general, I wonder if there's any satire that actually is subtle enough or it is like discreet enough that the right wing wouldn't accidentally adopt it and be like, yeah, it's fucking cool, Starship Troopers, let's go. Like, no, you look at like The Boys or something too, where they're like, they just realized this season that Homelander's the bad man. And so like, I am increasingly less interested in fussing over whether my own fiction is discreet enough to not turn off somebody who's like, seems kind of obvious, because there are people out there that really can't tell until it's obvious. I don't mean that you necessarily need to write to the dumbest person in the room in every given moment, but it does seem like we're living through a particularly stupid moment. It's like some wisdom and just kind of acknowledging that.
I think you're doing something that's horror comedy, that you're actually operating with a different, set of
Yeah.
rules than if you're doing something that is a more somber kind of horror, because I mean, of course you don't really have to be subtle if you're doing horror comedy. You just have to be funny. So it can be very on the nose as long as it's amusing. When you're writing something that's really serious, I write a lot of serious stuff, and honestly, I get like worried about whether or not I'm actually representing properly, because I don't, I write some things that are writing, their own voices, but a lot of times in one way or another, I'm writing the other, because I'm very prolific and I don't make every character exactly like me. So like in the metamorphoses of Linkei, this character is bipolar, and everything that he's going through, it's really something that's happened to me in one way or another, including times where he was in a mental hospital and other stuff like that. But when I wrote the character, I was watching Game of Thrones, and I was seeing how much people really hated Sansa Stark, because she was going through a whole bunch of stuff and she was a woman. And I thought about the gender of my character, and I was not out as a non-binary person at that point, but I was like, if I write this character as a woman, people are just gonna go, they're gonna have the same hatred of the victim. Mm-hmm. So I did not write, I wrote a male character. As a person with mental health problems, writing about mental health, you get a lot of sort of like toxic positivity pushback, right? You have to, represent mental health in like this super uplifting way, like Kurt Cobain and Winehouse, and, Virginia Woolf and them didn't all just like, unalive themselves. Like, exactly. Like, I'm not in a day-to-day struggle to just stay alive on the planet as a bipolar person. Like, I'm not supposed to talk about it. Yes, I am going to talk about it, and I'm not going to be able to talk about it in a really like, what is this about? Like, I'm going to have to talk about it in a really, really, really uplifting way. I'm going to talk about all the times I hallucinated after 9/11 in a really uplifting way. No, so for me, it's very cathartic to write characters that are having serious mental health issues. Because when you have mental health issues, you get gaslit because there's things that are really, really going on. And even though you're delulu, some of the stuff is real, especially like abuse of people that are mentally ill. We're more likely to be domestic violence victims. We're more likely to be sexual assault victims. We're more likely to become homeless and displaced because we become victims of things like that. So for me, I got to get people to care. Like the idea that people's baseline is that they give a shit about mental health. People, they do, it impacts them, but when they see homeless people talking to themselves on the street, a lot of people are just like, yeah, I don't want anything to do with you, and they dehumanize people. And I have been walking around talking to myself on the street. So for me, I have to make this character human to some people who might, no offense to anyone, not view people like me as entirely human. Mm-hmm. We're not entirely human. Either we're like a rock star, like Kurt Cobain, who's not a human because he's in, their artist trope. Either you're an artist trope or you're a suffering artist trope, or you're a grody person that's talking to themselves on the street that might be dangerous. So that's why I try to really, 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 really get people attached to the characters. And if they don't care about the characters, we're all Mr. Toomey in Stephen King's, novel. His portrayals of us are mostly as dangerous, honestly, and that's not really the truth. That's a half truth. It's a less than half truth. because we're much more likely to be in danger than dangerous.
So for it's a diverse genre with so many subgenres, like psychological, gothic, body horror, things like that. And I just want to know, like, which subgenre do you guys find the most compelling to write and why? Even if it hasn't been published yet. And then bonus, what's maybe a subgenre that you really want to write in, but your agent hasn't said yes or because you haven't worked out yet? In the one genre.
Sure. So I mean, for me, I think the easiest one and my default is horror comedy. You know, for all the things we've mentioned before. But I really, and this is not, my agent does not know this, but hi Amy, if you're watching, what's up? But I really just want to write something like really fucked up at some point, like bridge into the adult horror space. And just do something where I like, you know, don't kind of have to worry about the things that one might have to worry about in YA. And like take the humor part out of it and just sort of see what I can do when I'm not relying on being funny. So yeah, I just want to write, I don't even know, but
Like
it's gonna be
extreme?
real messed up.
Like extreme horror?
Maybe,
Splatterpunk?
maybe not like splatterpunk, but just like really have like characters who are just like horrible people.
You can do that in YA.
You can, yeah. You do it so well though. I don't
I love body horror so much. My body is a jerk. It's been a jerk for a long time. I'm past menopause, so I'm very happy about that. You know, I have endometriosis. I was diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis. If you don't know what that is, it causes a lot of really bad chronic pain, and it's like the number 2 cause of like infertility for AFAB people. You know, people don't want to talk about periods because it's gross to have blood come out. But oh my goodness. So they don't talk about it. And it was causing me so much pain that I sometimes would spend like a week or even 10 days in a month, like unable to sit up, unable to stand up, throw up. So having to deal with that much actual physical pain. And then I wanted to have kids. I never was able to, honestly. So I'm sitting there holding on to this monster in my body, which is my, you know, whole reproductive system that's, you know, just really making me in so much pain. I can't stand it. And I couldn't talk about it. So I started drawing cartoons that were like me just standing up and having a heavy flow drip down my leg and stuff like that. Sorry, it's gross. And so I write a lot of really, really, really gnarly body horror, stuff that has like all the infertility issues, like in like my second book, Warm, there's like there's these ghouls, and when they die, they turn into zombies, but this one lady miscarries and the zombie fetus starts eating its way out of her body. Stuff like that. One of my writing teachers told me that I have a real gift for the gross out. Honestly, and sometimes I feel really like guilty, like I'm a really, really like messed up person, because the Metamorphoses of Sumiko not only has body horror, but it has kinky sex body horror. Yeah, it's horror, romance, erotica. So like, who does that? I do. I mean, I'm dark to do it, so I don't feel too bad. Yeah.
It's just like Home does it too. I think a lot more people are moving toward horror romance, which I think is fucking awesome. But I love body horror as well. And I think I also have endometriosis, and I want to see the Venn diagram of people with endometriosis and people who want to write body horror, because that's not a perfect circle, but like there's overlap. And I've written a lot of horror comedy. Squad has like body horror elements to it. And I turned in my first slasher that is also like a horror comedy graphic novel that is, I'm kind of shocked sold in the YA market. But I would really like to write a home invasion story at some point. That is actually the horror that unsettles me the most and that I have the hardest time watching. Even when I'm like, this is a bad movie, I'm like, but tell me what's happening. I think, yeah, like Tananarive, I think, had like a really beautiful quote that I'm not gonna try to exactly remember because I'll fuck up for wording, but the general gist of it is like all horror is kind of about the home in some way or another. And I find that to be so true. And it's the place, like as a parent and as like somebody who's trying to keep other people safe, it's the most unsettling and the most upsetting to me. And I think I will probably not be prepared to actually write it until my kids are like out of the house. It's like, cause I keep trying and I like fuck myself up so badly that I'm like, and it's like with like baby touches, like just starting it. I'm like, ugh. And so someday I would like to be like tough enough to look my own like greatest fear like right down the barrel and be able to write it effectively, because I do think that home invasion gets right to the core of the thing that I'm the most scared of.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be a father pretty soon in a few weeks. And so, like you said, I'm not sure if I could touch that kind of subgenre of woman's body, infertility, births, because it freaked me out too much, or even little kid horror.
Yeah.
I think I gotta take a break from that because I wrote some type of stories. As for the subgenre that I love to write, sci-fi horror, because I'm obsessed with aliens because of my own experiences, and my dad's experiences and my mom. So a lot of stuff is happening. Creature features, I'm obsessed with those. You can do it right. And I love psychological because I spent like a decade depressed and suicidal. And so I've lived in my head a lot of my life. And I think getting into like the psyche of my past and kind of exploring that, I have done that in a few stories. But I think it's cathartic, like looking back now that where I am right now, you know, I have a wife, get on the way, teacher, all those good things. And psychological horror, I think, allows me to kind of like peek behind me and like say goodbye to it, and then be able to write fucked up shit about it, and then, you know, from a distance. Yeah. Let's see. Where do you guys see horror genre heading in the next decades, about 10 years or so? Are there any emerging trends or themes you find particularly exciting or concerning?
Sure. I think it's a very fun time for horror. Like YA horror in particular is like having a good moment. I think that there's just a lot of horror in general that's starting to highlight members of underrepresented communities and the things that, you know, we go through on the day-to-day. And there's horror coming from a lot of different places. Like there's a movie called His House on Netflix, which is like fantastic if you haven't watched it. It's an excellent haunted house movie that also talks about like immigration and like war and genocide and stuff like that. And yeah, I think, you know, we are living through horrible times. So I think that there is a lot as a society, both like in our country and like globally, that we kind of need to reconcile with. And you know, our complicitness in like certain things. And I think that hopefully in the next 10 years or so, there will be more folks who will start to address those things and kind of examine, sort of like what Shane was saying, you know, like examine the past, but then also how do we acknowledge that and try to make sure that horrible things that have happened, you know, don't happen again.
Yeah, I mean, we've come so far in the last 10 years, really, that I feel like we can keep going in the same direction in terms of increased not only diversity, but recognition that the diversity exists on a lot of different levels. So Tananarive just, got a Bram Stoker Award for the Reformatory, which is great, right? She was nominated way back in '96, and she might, don't hold me to this because I might be wrong, but I think she might be the first Black person that was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award way back in '96, but she just won. Okay. And I interviewed her for my column in the San Francisco Bayview, Writing All Black. And she said that back in the '90s, she had to make a choice between either trying to circulate in the horror world and become supported by horror writers, or to go to the Black community and get support there. And since the support was already in the Black community, and it was kind of trying to break down the walls in the horror community, she went back and got the support from the Black community. If any of you are like of a certain age, you probably remember when radio was segregated. There was the Black radio station and the white radio station, and you didn't commingle them. A breaking down of those walls happened in pop music. It happened in cinema arts when we had Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians and stuff happened about, gosh, what was that? And that was not even 10 years ago. That was within the last 10 years. That was like 2018. Right. So the same thing's happening with horror. It's happening in writing, but it's also happening with like Netflix. If you watch all these different like horror movies from different countries and stuff, it used to be that, let me put it this way, we have awards in speculative fiction, like, World Fantasy Awards and Bram Stoker Awards, and they are definitely supposed to be global awards, but they keep getting presented in English-speaking countries by English-speaking people, which means that lots and lots and lots of important work that we all know to be important doesn't even get looked at because it hasn't been translated into English, or by the time it gets translated into English, there's a whole thing there that's getting unraveled. So I think that we're going to see more writing by people who aren't native English speakers getting looked at. We're going to see more of people recognizing that this work exists because, it has existed and people have been fans of it for a long time, but I feel like the world's getting smaller because of the internet. I mean, I feel like on a certain level, they've been saying that since the '90s, but it's true. It's getting smaller and smaller. So I feel like things that are supposed to be global are going to be more global, and there's going to be more different types of diversity. I would like to see there be much more LGBTQ diversity because we're not where we're supposed to be at all. Clive Barker is a big queer horror writer who really had to write using a lot of metaphor and knowledge and stuff like that. There should be more queer horror that's not like metaphor.
I feel very quaint now bringing the focus back to the States, but the concerning trend that I feel like anytime I'm given any opportunity to speak now that I try to speak to is the rise of the culture of book bans in our country. And it is worth mentioning A Squad is my most banned book. Not because of its overwhelming violence, which would be a reasonable reason to talk about whether it should be in schools, but because it's queer. And it's a fight that we're losing. It's a fight that we're really behind on organizing around. It's reached a lot of state legislatures. Idaho just passed House Bill 710, which basically made it so that all libraries are financially liable if anyone walks into their children's section and says, this is inappropriate. They don't need to be a member of the community. There's no recourse. They just have to start paying. And as a result, Donnelly, Idaho has just created their public library on July 1st is going to be adults only going forward because that is the only way that they can financially weather the storm. An identical piece of legislation has just been introduced in Ohio. Louisiana has just outlawed people being members, or they're trying to outlaw people being members of the ALA at all, which is the American Library Association. We're really behind, and it's a fight that we can win because overwhelmingly more of us stand against book bans than with them. People in sort of like far right with interests in hegemony and fascism and like have figured out that book bans are the most way to sort of leverage people's easily inflamed bigotries to defund all of our institutions of public learning. So the good news, what little there is that when we are present in this fight, we do tend to win because they are really capitalizing on creating fear by accusing people of being pedophiles and groomers for having books in their libraries like everyone poops. That is not an exaggeration example. That's something that happened in Huntington Beach in California earlier, like 2 months ago. So, and they are right now auditing every single book in their children's library from board book to YA. They've moved them out of the kids section so that no kids have access to them until they are audited for pornography. They're trying to privatize that library simultaneously. So if this is something that makes you groan and feel horrified, I do encourage you to join Authors Against Book Bans, which is a group that I'm a founding member of. We're a nationally organized nationally led grassroots organized group that is seeking to sort of be the author army that's deployed where these things are happening, because our voices mean a lot in this argument, and we've been a little too quiet for a little too long. And so if you like reading fucked up body horror and like a YA horror comedy about a Filipina Buffy the Vampire Slayer with a demon who saved her from child abuse, and you like books like Never Whistle at Night, because a lot of Indigenous books are being targeted as well. Darcy Little Badger's books are like particularly hounded. I hope that you join us in this fight.
I wasn't aware of your organization.
Yeah, no. Every time I have a microphone, metaphorical or not. Thank you.
I think ending on a good note, mostly, to switch over to Q&A for the audience. So we're open for questions. If anyone wants to raise your hand, talk anything more, whether it's fiction, movies, nerdy stuff.
So about 3 years ago, there was a great series called Lovecraft Country, and it got canceled after 1 season.
Yeah.
So what can I want to get, how can we get something like that was speaking, it went back to civil rights, different times of Black history. And it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And something like that got canceled. What can suggestions do you have that can get these kind of films back? Series.
I think that show got hatred from 2 sides. Got hatred from those that don't even want to hear any of those stories, obviously. But then it also got some hatred from people that believe the source material should be written by Black folks. And there was a white guy that wrote that book, Lovecraft Country.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, so it happens in Indian country too. Indian as in Native American. Where the show on AMC Plus called Dark Winds. The book was written by a white guy. And there's a lot of hatred in our community, like do we promote this work that's based on like his interpretation of how things go. But on this side, it's like, hey, it's representation, it's employing a lot of Native writers, actors, grips, cameramen, all these things. So I think moving forward, I don't know, like, it's hard to get the money behind any project, like producers. In my experience, there's a lot of directors that are ready to do things in an own voices kind of way, where if it's Indigenous stories, you have Indigenous writers in the writing room, and you have Indigenous director ready. But the problem that I've been facing is the money part.
Yeah.
Whether you find producers that are okay with investing in your story and thinking that, oh, it's gonna reach a major audience. There's a lot of negativity in producers' eyes, like, it's not worth my money. I'm not going to put my money into this because it's only for this little section of people. Instead of being able to, put our stories out there to influence and entertain everyone.
I think the one great thing about Love the Craft Academy, country, whatever, is that it was very entertaining. And I think that a lot of times what has happened is like it's almost like what we were talking about earlier about things being too like heavy-handed or on the nose. People are so busy trying to really portray ourselves as serious that like when you look at like Kindred, they really, the way they did it, it was very, very, very dry because they were so busy trying to come off as very serious that they took a lot of the, I mean, that's what people noticed the most is how much they took out the sexuality and the sensuality that was very much a part of that story. And I think that, you know, when you have people writing about us, there's another set of problems too. That like, for example, what was that story? The Headless Horseman one, Sleepy Hollow. Right. That show started to get a really, really, really big Black fandom because it had you know, not just one major Black character, but a bunch of them because it was just her sister and a bunch of other ones. But as we got a really giant Black audience, the writers decided to suddenly kill off a bunch of Black characters and have a bunch of white people in it. So I think that what you're saying about people being upset about how we're represented is one problem, but another problem is that if people didn't intend us to be the audience and we become the audience, then we need producers that are going to respect us as the audience, no matter what the race of these particular producers is. They need to respect or want or desire to have us as audiences. And then they're doing a balancing act of trying to have a larger audience and appeal to us. And that can be tricky. It can be done. I mean, The Walking Dead did it. The Walking Dead did a lot of things that pissed me off as a person of color, but they still managed to keep the POC audience and keep the you know, main POC audience. They scrape wash the hell out of it, though. You know, they just really just erase the queerness of a bunch of characters. So it's hard. And I don't think there's a simple answer, honestly.
I think we're overestimating our influence in this situation. I think we're struggling with the fact that we're basically receiving all of our movies and TV from a very small group of studios at this point. And when there's that much control with that few of outlets, you're always going to see less diversity. The people who are making those decisions are homogenous. And so instead of, for me anyway, what I've tried to kind of like in my own life adjust for, because we're going to always see stories like Lovecraft Country or Shogun, where it's like, it's a white guy's story about feudal Japan, and I'm supposed to be excited because they tried to retrofit it with a bunch of Japanese writers and make their one female character like kind of interesting this time around. Like, instead of looking to Hollywood to be like, you'll fix it. No, they won't. They're capitalism and they won't fix anything for us. And I think that like fiction and the work where individuals who are not beholden to having all of their work, like, what's the word where they get a bunch of people together to say, what do you think of this? And they focus groups. Thank you. That hasn't been focus grouped into fucking oblivion. That's the only place we're ever going to see any kind of interesting movement in any sort of direction in terms of diverse representation, in terms of diverse stories, in terms of stories that aren't going to take all of the queer people out and pretend that now they're straight or whatever it is. Just that, yeah, like, yeah, and Disney basically owns the entire children's market for all genre fiction. We should be troubled by that. That the same people are making all the decisions about what our kids are going to watch from the time that they are toddlers till the time that they are 18. And then when they graduate from that, they'll be like, congratulations, the Marvel universe is there for you. It's not good. And so like, I don't think that we can approach Hollywood with a lot of hope for them fixing our problems because they won't. They're not invested in it. And so all we can do is kind of mind our side of the nerdy little street where we're like, but in my story, fucking crazy shit happens. And I'm like, you know, I'm gonna faithfully represent what it means to struggle with mental health problems without trying to glamorize it or whatever it is, because it's gonna come from individuals. It's not gonna come from these mega corporations who are the ones who put out the most media that most Americans see. And we won't see any change in what they do until the monoculture that they are serving changes. And so it is a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, because you're like, but good stories would change those minds. Yeah, but the people who get to decide what stories get told aren't interested in doing that work.
Yeah,
I
I will say that we're not the only country that makes movies.
Yeah.
And like I do consume a lot of non-American horror. And if you watch like British horror or French horror that's like teens, there is so much queerness. It's just like just like, hey, we're here, we're gay, hey, what's up? And it's just it's very organic too.
Yeah.
It's just there are queer people and they're here, and sometimes they're stars of these movies, like the Netflix and Hulu LGBTQ collections. For if you go there, so many of them that are actually horror that are really, really queer and really good.
That's such a good point. I'm very American focused, and I'm realizing like you're doing such a good job of reminding us this is like a global thing. But in terms of like American media, I don't trust or, optimism of more programming like Lovecraft country coming, especially when we're seeing like this huge shrinking in the streaming market since that basically started bottoming out. They were really growth oriented, and now they're not. You're like, oh shit. So we're only going to pay for this amount of programming. And of course, the minute that they had to make cuts, they cut all of us. That was it. That was their first swipe. Was just like, get rid of every person of color, get rid of everything run by a woman, unless she's Shonda Rhimes, and then like get rid of everything that's queer. And that's been kind of their solution. And so we've just got to make our own shit.
And I think there's a minstrel show type of horror comedy for Black folks that's like still really popular in this country. And like it gets funded, you know, because people are racist and they still want to bring minstrel show stuff. But then Black people take it and actually put messages into it, like Tales from the Hood. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you know, it's almost like we have to keep clowning ourselves to get money. I like those movies though. I love Bones. That's one of my favorite movies, but you know, yeah, I don't know how to make them do that. They have money, you know.
Sorry to jump in, but we're like 1 minute mark. So I just want to really quick, starting with Alex coming my way. Where's the best place online for people to find you and you?
Sure. My website, which I have not updated, but I should, is alexbrownwrites.com. I'm also on Twitter, at gravity_fail09. I made it in college, I'm sorry. And Instagram is at made this for Lou, L-U. I made it for a friend because they wanted me to have an Instagram. And now it's 10 years later, my author Instagram. So here we
go. I'm SumikoSaulson.com is my website, so you can definitely do that. Sumiko SKA, that's like style music, is my handle almost everywhere, honestly, on the internet, except for Instagram, because I said that on my dad's iPad and it stole that. And so Sumiko's also in there. Yeah.
I'm Maggie Tokuda-Hall on Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. But honestly, I don't give a shit if you follow me. I hope that you follow Authors Against Book Fans instead. You can go to authorsagainstbookfans.com to join. If you are a person who's ever had your name on a book as a contributor, as an anthology editor, doesn't matter if you're traditionally or independently published, we would like to have you.
And I'm Shane Hawk, so shanehawk.com has all my socials on there. I'm mostly on Instagram, Twitter, X, and Facebook, TikTok, but thank you for coming, and it's a great talk. Appreciate it.